So today I'm going to be adding my thoughts into the mix regarding the Audra Winter drama slash conspiracy. A couple of my viewers have requested that I make this video from my particular point of view as someone who has a fantasy world and who is trying to share it with others. For anyone who is unfamiliar, and I was myself unfamiliar until about 1 or 2 days ago, with this internet drama that's going on in the kind of book world of TikTok and YouTube. There is a 22-year-old author who started an imaginary world or a fantasy world when she was 12 years old, and has been writing a book about it over the course of 10 years. She's now 22, and she was sharing on TikTok the process of turning that world and her stories into a book. And she got quite a big following, is my understanding, and a lot of people pre-ordered her book and gave money, I believe. And what has happened is they've now received those books that they paid for, and many of them are disappointed. And apparently there has been some unusual behaviour by her around how she handled creating the book and how she's handled kind of the criticism that she's received afterwards. This has turned up at my doorstep for quite an interesting reason. Is this world that she has, that she created when she was 12, she's very attached to, apparently. And there's been some speculation online that what this world is might be something called a paracosm. Now, a paracosm is a fantasy world, an intricate fantasy world that might include characters and stories, but it's a little bit different to kind of typical world building that you might see in films or TV, because a paracosm is a personal expression. Often it's a personal world that people have and create in their mind, although sometimes artistically, over the course of many years, sometimes decades, sometimes over the course of their life. And in these worlds, you might weave in personal things about you. So maybe experiences that you've had, or your particular values, or in my case, things that I find funny. And so when this has happened online, that people have identified that it might be a paracosm, people have been looking to try to make sense of whether that explains some of the strange approach and behaviour that apparently she has had. And that's how they've ended up at my door, because my YouTube channel is about paracosms, and in particular my own paracosm. So what I can offer you, I'm not a drama channel and I do not know the intricate ins and outs of this story, so I'm going to focus in my video about things that I feel qualified to talk about. So my video is going to cover the following 4 points. If you have a paracosm, are you naturally a good author? Number 2 will be, would a paracosm world make a good novel? Number 3 will be, can a paracosm world be edited? Number 4 will be, should we encourage and celebrate paracosm worlds? So let's get on with number 1. If you have a paracosm, does that mean that you're a natural author and that you should write a book? So I can talk from my perspective as someone who has a paracosm. I started my paracosm, so my personal imaginary world, when I was 9 years old. My paracosm is called Chutasia, and it was inspired by my stuffed toy hedgehog Chutney, who comes from the world of Chutasia. And when I was 9, I created the map of Chutasia, and I started writing the histories of the hedgehogs, the curious potato-loving, cheeky hedgehogs of Chutasia. And because you start making lots of stories, you start writing them down, and you end up with quite a lot of notes of paper of all your different ideas. And naturally, people start to suggest, and you think yourself, well, I've got all these notes, I'm doing all this documentation, surely I'm writing a book. Surely this would work as a book. I should write it all up. I should tidy up all my notes and it'll be a book, and that's how I'll share it with the world. And it feels like I didn't question that for a very long time. But the problem that I found, and I don't know if this is the case for Audra, those of you who are in the know might well comment below, is that I actually don't like writing. So I've made this world with all these characters and these stories, but I don't like writing. I'm probably moderately good at writing, but I don't enjoy it. So for me, I'm actually quite a lot older than Audra, so I know that she did hers for 10 years and wrote her book. I've had my world for more than 20 years. And for most of that time, I thought, oh God, I have to write a book. And I was putting it off, and that's why I wasn't sharing it. And in the end, I decided I'm not going to write a book. I'm going to share my world on YouTube. So that's what I'm doing here. Another route that sometimes people take if they don't see themselves as a writer, but they have this imaginary world, is they go down the route of maybe they're quite a talented painter or artist, and they focus on sharing their world by artwork, and then maybe just adding a bit of writing around it to add context. And again, I can draw a bit, I'm kind of okay at artwork, but that I don't really see myself doing a lot of drawing or painting, and I didn't think that I was particularly gifted in it. So again, I was stuck with this, I've got an imaginary world, but I'm not an author and I'm not an artist. And one thing, going back to Audra, is my understanding is that she herself hasn't done the artwork. She employed or asked her artist friends to contribute artwork for her books and her bookmarks and things like that. And my understanding from what I've seen is that people in general quite like the artwork. They like the characters, they like the ideas, and they like the artwork. The issue was more with the writing. And so that's quite interesting. I don't know if Audra is anything like me, but the way that I've come to understand myself is that I'm an ideas person. I'm a stories and ideas person. I'm not a writer. I'm not an author. I'm more of an art director, more of a producer, more doing things in a broad way and less very tight details. So I have characters and places in my world, but if you asked me to sketch them, it would be quite difficult to have to make so many decisions about the way that things should look. So it's possible that Audra might also be in the same situation as me, where you have this world that you want to share, but you don't quite understand the medium to do it. So that's how I ended up on YouTube, was that I removed everything I didn't like doing and thought, well, I will just share my stories. And I'm still in the process of trying to remove things that I don't like doing, such as script writing. I'm trying to even overcome that. So touching on that, my understanding is that people have pointed out how excited or enthusiastic she was about telling people about her world and them creating this artwork around it, and kind of questioning like, wow, she seems really into that. And I can kind of relate. I don't have that ability myself to draw my characters or my locations in great depth. And if I had the opportunity to work alongside an artist who would create work for me, I would also think that was amazing. So I wouldn't judge her on being enthusiastic about her world being brought to life, especially when it's something that you're so passionate about. And isn't it great to have things in life that you're passionate about? I don't see any problem with that. So the next topic that I'm covering is whether a paracosm world makes a good novel. So continuing on with, I suppose, my own sort of personal struggle of how to share a world like this online. Is people commented that in her book, there were sections that were very lore heavy, or like kind of felt like info dumps where there was just lots of information and perhaps that got in the way of the story. As I said, I've not read it. I don't know about that, but I can relate to this struggle around info dumps. So the way that I've come to understand it is, if she's built her world up over 10 years, I've built my world up over 20 years. A world that is built over 20 years, that sometimes gets added to on a daily basis, cannot be quickly shared with others. When I try to share, I've got to put things in a very digestible way. I've got to walk people through. I've got to think, that people are tuning into videos for entertainment and relaxation, and perhaps they're reading books for entertainment and relaxation. And it can be very hard, so I completely relate, can be very hard to find this balance between telling an entertaining story, or in my case, kind of entertaining ideas or concepts or characters, but also kind of trying to drip feed people more information about the background of the world to kind of build their knowledge. So what I think with the lore aspect and the info dump is, my own approach would be, probably my world couldn't be one book. So maybe those of you who have read it can consider, would it have been better if she'd have written it as a series? Then the lore aspect could have been more spread out. That would be a question mark. Another idea that one might have, if you've got a story, a narrative that you want to tell, but also you have a very in-depth world with the history and background, geography and stuff, would be to create a novel and then alongside of it have a kind of encyclopedia that people can dip in and out of to read more in depth about the history of a place. If I was going to write a book, I don't know, as I said, I'm not a writer, but you don't cross things off. If I was going to write one, I would, as someone with a paracosm, be more drawn to doing an encyclopedia. And I'll touch later on just a bit more about why I would suggest an encyclopedia. So yeah, my point there is that a world that took 10, or in my case 20 years to build, cannot be shared easily. And as part of the struggle is to figure out how your audience can be brought along and introduced and sort of taught about your world in a way that doesn't feel like school. Apparently, some people said they actually took notes when they were reading her book because they were almost like they were trying to learn it like they were at school. And at least for my content, I don't like the idea that someone would have to write notes to follow. So, and to be clear, I don't have the perfect formula. I'm still figuring out. A lot of my videos have like under 50 views. So I'm not saying I found the perfect answer, but what I'm saying is, as someone who has an in-depth world, who's trying to introduce it to others, this is a struggle. And what I do is I literally in every single video pretty much explain everything. I explain enough for them to be able to understand the story or the joke, and then I say, if you want more about that, you can go check out this video. So it's something that I relate to. On that same topic around this iteration that I've found myself doing, trying to experiment with different ways to bring complete newcomers into such a detailed world, there's a lot of questions about, well, like, what angle do you come at? If you're going to talk about the different islands that make up Chutasia, which island do you start with? If you're going to introduce characters, well, which character do you start with? And it's actually quite difficult. Anyone who's written a book or tried to do anything creative might well have the same issue as how do I introduce this to someone slowly? But I would say, I mean, I wouldn't want to say that Audra is unlucky because I don't think she's unlucky at all. But it looks like this is her first iteration. So this is her first iteration is writing this book. She's getting some audience feedback. And my understanding is that now she's going to do a second version of the book based on the audience feedback. And then what might happen is they might go, well, this doesn't work very well as a book. Let's make an animation. And then you go, oh, it doesn't really work so well as an animation. Let's make it a live theatre show. Oh, it didn't really work so well as that. Let's do a immersive experience. And this iteration is normal in the creative process. I think just what's unusual here is that she had so much focus on like her very first iteration, but this is something that I'm actually very interested by. As I said, I don't know a lot about her story, but I've been sharing my world for a year online, and I'm in no way complaining because I understand these things take time and I have to make good content that people want to watch. But when I heard that she had managed to get so much enthusiasm and support around her imaginary world, I thought, well, this is very interesting. I wonder how she managed to achieve that. That's actually something quite remarkable and something to be celebrated. That she was able to do such a great sort of marketing campaign that brought people in, and that maybe there are aspects that I can learn from that, in terms of just trying to get people interested in my work. Anyone who's an artist is like, how do you get people interested in what you're doing? So that's quite an interesting use case. I don't want this video at all to seem like I'm insulting or being mean to Audra, because I'm really not. In many ways, I'm a little envious of her because she's quite young, and my understanding is that if you put the novel aspect aside and you instead think she has documented her world, to have documented in one place all of the details about your world and your characters at the age of 22 is impressive, and to have self-published that is also impressive. I was not there at 22, so I think in many ways she seems to have done a pretty good job. And yeah, it's just unfortunate that it's her first iteration and there was not so much, she didn't have information from the audience about how they would best receive that work. But as I said, I don't really know the ins and outs of things, and I've no doubt that the internet will correct me if I've got this completely wrong. Something that I missed here that I thought was important enough to come back and film is the creative approach, how paracosms come about. Again, only speaking for myself, but the way that I add into paracosms is spontaneous. And what I find is that at sometimes in my life, I work on a particular character, on other times I work on a particular island, and I tend to go around the different aspects of the world. And the actual narrative, the actual story, so in my case, it's Chutney is born and then she travels through Chutasia and then she ends up at this time travel microwave, and it is through this microwave that she comes to planet Earth. That narrative, that kind of traditional story adventure, was an afterthought, or maybe not an afterthought, but it was something that came later. When I created my paracosm, it was about the geography and the history and the different religions and the peoples. It was not about a clear start, middle, end, twist, etc. And if you are reading some of these like best-selling novels and stuff, they all have teams of people whose their whole purpose is to lay out the novel to make sure that it has a clear, opening, middle, some sort of twisty thing, and an ending, and specifically an ending that feels like it resolves things. And they will probably have multiple meetings about the pacing of a book and things like that. And for me, at least, and again, I can't speak for Audra, is that the way that my paracosm approached was very different to that. Of course, the narratives and the stories within the paracosm could be developed to have this kind of good storytelling momentum and things like that. But it's not, at least for me, it's not a natural part of the creative process. It's not sort of creating a great in-depth novel. It's sort of adding bits here and there. So that is why I said earlier that I thought an encyclopedia is a pretty good way to share a world, because it allows you to have like a kind of really crazy in-depth section about the history of a desert in your world, and then to have a much shorter section about, a character. And then you can fill in here and there, and you don't need to worry about disrupting some sort of overall story. That overall story, at least in my case, it could be like a short story on the side. In fact, I have lots of short stories that could be short stories on the side, and maybe that is applicable to Audra's world. Let's move on to, can a paracosm be edited? So one of the questions that I've had when people have come to my videos about paracosms, they're looking for my take on what's happened with Audra, is they're saying that she didn't take any advice regarding her writing, or she didn't get feedback on her writing, or perhaps that she has been defensive around the way that it is written and the story. And they're asking me, well, is that characteristic of a paracosm? Is that just because it's a paracosm and not a sort of regular commercial world? And what I have to say in terms of paracosm being edited or changed is there is a nugget of truth in this, actually. Speaking for myself, again, I don't know Audra's situation, but speaking for myself, because a paracosm is something personal that you're creating, it's sort of a self-expression that's come from you, that's inspired by your life or some sort of story that you want to tell. It can be a place that you retreat to. The way that you interact with it and build with it is quite different from creating a world for others. When you create a world for others, you might brainstorm cool names for a character, or you might have a sort of part of the story that changes and, oh, let's make this bit more exciting and add in a fight scene or something like that. You can think about the audience a lot more when you're building the world. Whereas when you have a paracosm, it's a bit more like you're reporting on a world, you're spontaneously creating things, and there's a bit more attachment, like it's true, like it becomes true. So like if I, come back Chutney, if I interpret something about Chutney and Chutney's world, once it's said, it's kind of set in stone. So for instance, my YouTube channel is called Sarah and Chutney, and I received some of my family members were like, doesn't that sound like a cooking channel, Sarah and Chutney? And it's like, well, if I change her name from Chutney to Hedgie, Sarah and Hedgie, it might be better in terms of marketing. It might be more obvious for an audience. It might be more commercially viable. But it's like, but she's not called Hedgie. She's called Chutney, short for Chutnita Spikerina Hedgeton II, heir to the Chutasian throne. What are you talking about? So I do really empathize with like not wanting to change the content of the world. I'm very hesitant to ever change the content of my world, and I have sort of explanations within my world that explain how things in the world can change without it breaking the logic of the world. I'll put a video below if you're interested in that. Anyway, but what I am open to is I'm very flexible about how that world is presented. So as I talked about iterating through all different styles of video, are the videos 5 minutes long? Are they half an hour long? Do I have text on the screen? Do I have images on the screen? How lore heavy is it? Or how sort of jokey and laid back is it? I'm playing around, trying to figure out how can I share this? Because I want to share it, but there's also an audience. So in terms of, I don't know exactly, because I don't know Audra's thing, as I keep saying, but does that apply at all to what you think that you've seen? Is she not willing to change the content or the story, but might be willing to change the text? It does seem that she's willing to change the actual text because she's doing a version 2. What I would say is if the only reason why I could think that someone with a paracosm wouldn't want to change the actual writing would be if, in the way that I'm saying that the paracosm, the content of the paracosm is personal, spontaneous, personal self-expression that's sort of unique and precious to me. If I was including in that the style of writing, my choice of word, if I was extending that and saying like, well, the words that I chose to describe this are also part of my artistic expression, therefore I can't change them without just destroying the art. I could imagine that. And you could also imagine that if someone has written stories during a particular time of their life, then those stories and those particular words said in that particular way might be some sort of precious sentimental thing, because like when you read them you're like reminded of the time in your life when you wrote them, in which case you wouldn't want to change the wording. But yeah, as I said, my understanding is she's doing a version 2, so I think that she's probably happy to change the wording. I don't know why she wouldn't take feedback on the writing. I'm not a writer. Maybe she thought the writing was good enough. I don't know. I'm moving on now to talk about whether paracosms should be encouraged and celebrated. In the case of Audra Winter, obviously people have got behind her and supported her and given her money to progress the work on this world that she appears to be very emotionally attached to. She appears to be very passionate about. And there have been a couple questions that have come up. I do get them sometimes on my channel where people say, isn't a paracosm unhealthy? Isn't it an unhealthy coping mechanism? And, therefore, is it a good idea to encourage someone to continue doing that? So I have my own take on this, and maybe it is perhaps a bit more directed to people who actually have paracosms, but it might be relevant to others. So my thoughts on whether paracosms are an unhealthy coping mechanism or not. I would start off by looking at this word coping mechanism and wondering a bit what it means. So in my experience, I don't know how old you think I am, but I'm actually quite old. In my experience of life, life always contains some sort of struggle, some sort of thing that you're trying to overcome, something that's a bit less than ideal, maybe things that are painful. And it doesn't mean that life is terrible, but it does mean that there's always something. In my experience, there's always something going on. I wouldn't want to say life is suffering or something like that, but there's always a struggle. People have good days and bad days, and this is the case for everyone. And I remember that was quite a profound experience for me. I think I was 17 and I was on a train and I looked at all these strangers around me on the train and I realized all of these people are main characters in their stories, and all of these people have terrible things that have happened to them or that they're going through. Someone might have just had a terrible illness, someone might have died, another one might have lost their job, and you don't know that, especially if you look on Instagram. You're like, wow, everyone has a perfect life. Like, no, they don't. Everyone has something, and everyone has to find a way of dealing with these kind of terrible things that life sometimes throws our way. So I think everyone has to have some sort of coping mechanisms or ways to temporarily alleviate the struggle of life. The kind of traditional advice would be, oh, you've had a bad day. Why don't you go for a walk with your dog? You'll be in a new environment, so you can calm yourself down. You might have some new ideas. It's a bit of a distraction, takes you away from the situation, allows you to process your emotions. And for many people, that's true. But for instance, I don't, that wouldn't work for me. Other people, they want to I'm having such a bad day at work. I'm going to go home, curl up on the sofa and with a blanket and watch Netflix. And other people decide to daydream. And so only because daydreaming is less common than going for a walk, having a bath, whatever, doesn't mean that it's like a coping mechanism that you should necessarily get rid of. So let's talk about unhealthy coping mechanism, because I agree that there can be unhealthy coping mechanisms. But just going back again to my previous point, I missed an important thing, is taking that to the extreme. Would be like Buddhism or something inspired by Buddhism. I don't want to say it's perfect Buddhism, but Buddhism might be like, oh, life is suffering. Everything is suffering. This is a poor characterization of Buddhism, by the way, but I'm just saying, imagine that you took this point that life is suffering, everything is suffering. I'm going to give away all of my material goods. I'm not going to have a phone. And in my opinion, that's also a coping mechanism. You're coping by well, if I don't buy the phone, then I won't be anxious about losing the phone. Or if I don't buy the phone, I won't have to deal with the stresses around the phone. So in my opinion, it's still a coping mechanism. Of course, I am not a psychologist or anything like that. I'm just a person, and you should listen to what I say with the degree of respect that I deserve or don't deserve. So you can hear me, but also be critical. So regarding unhealthy coping mechanism, when does a coping mechanism become unhealthy? And for me, it is if your coping mechanism stops you from doing something that you actually want to do, or from being something that you actually want to be, then it would, in my opinion, be unhealthy. So what do I mean by this? When you're like, oh, I'm going to go and have a shower. And then you sit on your bed and you scroll on social media for an hour instead. And afterwards you have this yucky feeling. You're like, I wanted to have a shower. I didn't want to scroll. Why did I scroll? This isn't what I wanted to do. And that yucky feeling is what I would say to look out for. So if you are doing a paracosm, you've got an imaginary world that you like to delve into, or you have maladaptive daydreaming. I've done a video about maladaptive daydreaming, and there's lots of resources online. Maladaptive daydreaming is kind of like obsessive daydreaming, maybe not obsessive, but excessive. Well, what they call excessive daydreaming. Maybe I have different ideas, but if you do this daydreaming and then afterwards you have that yucky feeling of oh, I've wasted my day. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to do my chores, do my homework, and have a shower, and instead I've just stayed in bed daydreaming, then yes, that might be something unhealthy that you want to address and take action for, like, well, how can I be more in line with what I want to do and my goals that I want to achieve? Another side of that is, what I said around being who you want to be. So, like, oh, I was daydreaming about my imaginary world and I didn't notice, therefore, that my best friend was calling me and she was upset because her boyfriend broke up with her. And because I was doing my daydreaming, I wasn't the person that I want to be. I want to be someone who's there for their friends, who is able to pick up the phone when needed. And I wasn't able to be that because I was distracted daydreaming. So that's what you're looking out for. It's totally possible that you spend your whole Saturday morning daydreaming and at the end you're like, I think it's fine. I think it's fine that I did that. That's what I wanted to do. I like check in with yourself. What did I want to do this morning? Okay, nothing. How did I spend my day daydreaming? Am I happy with that? Is that who I want to be? Yeah. Okay, fine. In my opinion, not unhealthy. But but, I'm not perfect. So that's my take on it. And of course, you want to avoid black and white thinking. Sometimes when you're doing a paracosm or daydreaming, it might be unhealthy. Sometimes it might be healthy. And you just need to keep checking in and try to reduce the number of unhealthy times that you do it. And I know I'm saying this like it's some sort of like obvious and easy thing. It isn't obvious and easy to know what do I want to do and who do I want to be. It's actually probably one of the biggest questions in life that's never answered and is forever changing. So I don't say that as some kind of like, oh, well, it's obvious, just stop if you want to stop. Like, no, I understand. I'm not trying to be patronizing to young people at all, but, I remember being a teenager and being in my 20s. And that was like the biggest thing that I had to deal with is like, well, who do I want to be? What do I want to do with my life? And so someone saying to me like, well, is daydreaming in line with who you want to be? I'm like, I don't know. So just keep trying to listen to yourself and trying to figure out. And sometimes you don't know that that it wasn't in line until afterwards. So you might get invited to go to the cinema with some friends and you're like, no, I'd rather stay at home and do my imaginary world. And then afterwards they're telling you about the film and then you get the yucky feeling. Oh, perhaps I would have liked to have gone to that. It's like, that's fine. You just take that information and next time you can make an informed choice about whether to go or not. You're never going to get it perfect. Be kind to yourself. So that's my thoughts on whether, coping mechanisms are normal and healthy. It's good. It means you've found ways to deal with the stresses of life. And actually having a paracosm as a coping mechanism, in my opinion, is a stroke of genius. At a time when you needed it in your life, you created in your imagination a safe, fun place for you to retreat to or get your needs met or to have some sort of creative self-expression. That's great. That's amazing. Don't be ashamed about that. That's super cool, in my opinion. Of course, I would say that. So going back to Audra Winter, is it a bad idea to support her with this paracosm? As long as she's happy doing it, and as long as it's in line with her goals and who she wants to be, then why not? Let's encourage people to follow their passions. Let's encourage people to have self-expression and follow their creative pursuits. And I wish her the best with the future books. And I hope this was insightful for people who are trying to figure out what was going on with her. If you are interested in my 20-year-old world of curious potato and yogurt loving mischievous hedgehogs, then I will link on the screen my video for newbies that will help you be eased into my world and decide if it's something that you'd be interested in.